Hello, and welcome to Rob from the Internet Talks About Beer, a show where we discuss different styles of beer, beer history, beer flavor profiles. We give shout outs to breweries we think make exceptional beer, and we talk about whatever else happens to come to mind during the course of our conversation. I'm Rob from the Internet. Let's talk about beer. All right, so joining me today is Brian Alberts. If you would, Brian, tell me a little bit about yourself and how you got into craft beer.
Oh, hello. Thanks for having me on the show. I'm Brian Alberts. I'm a historian by trade and training. And so I tend to just kind of investigate history through the lens of beer and try and find new ways to look at how we understand ourselves, how we understand our own identity and our own context by using kind of that beer history as, I don't know, kind of as a way in, which I think has worked out pretty well so far. So I've done a variety of, writing. I'm doing podcasting now, I've done museum work, all that kind of stuff. The rest of the time in my life, I'm a part-time stay-at-home dad, taking care of two wonderful little children. I live out in the Pacific Northwest now for a couple of years, and so I'm always, trying to find new trails. Very very cliche stuff for being out in Washington State. But yeah, Mount Rainier is my playground. I love it.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah. Actually, Washington State is one of the two states I have not been to. Well, I take that back. There are technically four states I haven't been to, Alaska and Hawaii, but they're not contiguous United States. But yeah, so it would be Washington State and Oregon. I've hit every other state in the contiguous United States except those two, and they're on the list. It's just that, it's one of those things I got to get out that way.
Yeah, life happens, right?
Yeah, life does happen. All right. So today we're going to be talking about Mexican lager. For those who don't know, Mexican lagers are a variation on Vienna style lager. So what happened was in the 1800s, a bunch of German and Austrian immigrants who were brewers happened to emigrate to Mexico, and brought the Vienna style lager with them when they came. And it became really popular down there. So it had kind of lost favor in Europe to the pale ales because I don't know, for people who don't know, Vienna lagers are kind of a coppery colored. They're not a pale ale, but they're not a super dark ale. They fall right in the middle there. It kind of fallen out by the wayside in Europe, but became really popular in Mexico. So these German and Austrian immigrants who settled in what is now modern day Mexico, and actually parts of it are Texas, but that's a whole nother that's a whole nother discussion. So they brought the style with them, but it's funny is this style is not what people typically think of when they think of Mexican beer. So when they think of Mexican beers, they tend to think of something that's super light, super fizzy, kind of very very similar to like your Buds and your Millers and stuff like that. That super light macro beer, and actual true Mexican lagers aren't that way. They're a little heavier, have a little more body to them. The beer's influence in Mexico was strengthened when Maximilian I, who was a German, was named the Emperor of Mexico in 1864. And although he was murdered in 1867 by Mexican nationalists, he didn't last long, but the beer style has stuck around to modern times. So it's actually the beer Dos Equis is the most common Mexican lager, actual Mexican lager you will find coming out of Mexico, and it was originally. The recipe was originally brought over by an immigrant from Germany. So, and they still use the same recipe today, which is kind of cool. Mexican lagers, like Vienna lagers and most lagers, tend to be really well balanced, very palate pleasing. So they're kind of sweet, not cloyingly sweet. They have a little bit of hop to them, not a whole lot of bitterness from the hops, not a whole lot of stuff like that. So, but yeah, so let's get right into it. So I am drinking Uno Mas from Muddy York, which is a brewer local to me. They're in the Toronto area. So I'm gonna pour it into my glass, and we'll get started with the best part of the show.
Shall I join you, or should I keep mine in
Oh
reserve for
no,
now? Okay.
Pop it open and start drinking, man.
Okay, yeah, I got a Mexican lager called Cervecita from Stoop Brewing, which is in the Ballard neighborhood of Seattle. If you're in Seattle and a beer fan, you almost certainly know Stoop by now. If you are not from the Seattle area, Stoop is a wonderful place, and you should check them out if you're ever in the city. Let's get this
Excellent.
cracked open.
Oh, that's a beautiful sound.
And I'm putting it, because I'm not a Seattle native. I'm actually putting this into my McHenry Brewing Company glass that I brought because I'm originally from McHenry, Illinois.
Nice.
So I like to do that. I like to kind of thematically link different aspects of my life through the beer that I drink,
Hey,
in all these silly little ways.
So for people who might be interested, according to the style, so Vienna Lager / Mexican Lager / almost any other lager, the proper glassware is technically a fluted glass, which is what I'm using today. But that being said, if you go to a bar, it's going to be served in a shaker pint, which is what Brian happens to be using today. Or you might get served in a nonic pint, which is perfectly fine as well. If it's a good beer, it's going to be a good beer no matter what glassware it is. But the tasting experience might be enhanced if you're using the suggested glassware. So right off the top. So this is just out of my cooler. So it's a little under temperature, typical for what you would normally serve it at, but not a whole lot of aroma, and that's what you should expect from this style of beer. You might pick up a little bit of sweetness on the aroma. You might pick up a little bit of biscuitiness on the aroma, but there's not going to be a whole lot. You're not going to smell alcohol. You're not going to smell the hops. Like I said, you're barely going to smell anything else. But that's the true to the style. So unlike its originator, the Vienna Lager, the Mexican Lager is a little bit lighter in color. Now you'll notice it's not that super pale yellow like you get from your Millers and your Buds and things like that, but it's also not the coppery brown color that you would get from a Vienna Lager. So it's going to be somewhere in the golden yellow to light amber color, and this one falls kind of in the middle. It looks a little darker on my camera than it looks to the naked eye. It's a little bit lighter, but it is a light beer, and obviously you can see through it, minus the condensation on my glass, which is typical of the style. It should be clear. Should be clear to brilliantly clear is what they say. I don't know what brilliantly clear means, but I can see through it. I mean, I can look through and I can see Brian on my computer screen through the beer. So.
Well, there you go. Yeah, I gotta say, just unless the digital displays change things a little bit, mine seems to be a bit of a lighter color than yours. Mine kind of is more of that like approaching kind of that champagne of beers type of look to it. I did check it out, and yeah, I got almost no aroma. So you're absolutely right. And I'm also gonna give my disclaimer right here. I am not a beer judge or a beer expert. I'm an expert in old paper, not in tasting or identifying beer. And the old paper doesn't taste nearly as good. So, so when it comes to, yeah, you try a little nibble in the archive and they get real mad. So, but yeah, so I taste beer very much just as a regular everyday fan. But that said, I really like this beer.
Yeah, so I am not a beer judge myself. I'm just a seasoned beer drinker. So when I talk about things, it's because I've researched what they should taste like, and I've had enough of them to drink that I can pretty much tell you, yeah, this is how this is supposed to taste. Because I don't know about you, but I'm 50 years old. I've been drinking since I was since I was 12 because I'm German. But I've had a lot of beers in my time, so I know what most styles should taste like. But I do still do some research to make sure that what I think it should taste like is actually what it should taste like. So, and on this one, on the initial taste, it's very well balanced. I wasn't picking up any hop bitterness. I wasn't picking up any overt sweetness. I mean, it has a little bit of that malty sweetness because it is beer and it's made with malts, and it has just a tiny bit of a bitter finish on the end, but it's really well balanced. It's not overly sweet, and it's not overly bitter. It's one of those styles of beers that you could sit around all day and be drinking these. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
second drink, now that my palate has become acclimatized to it, I pick up a little more sweetness. You get that breadiness and that biscuitiness from the malts, but you're also getting a little extra sweetness because the thing that makes a Mexican lager is they typically have flaked corn or maize in them. And that means that it's been crushed, kind of like your Quaker oats. So it gets rid of the germ and gets rid of most of the oils, but it leaves behind the flavor and it leaves behind the sugars. So and it also helps to color it, which is why they tend to be that yellowy color as opposed to being the coppery color, because they swapped out the flaked corn for one of the other malt ingredients in the beer. So, but yeah, it's nice. As it warms up, the aroma pretty much stays the same. It gets where you can smell a little bit more sweetness to it as it opens up and everything. But it's definitely not one of those type of beers where you're drinking it and you're like, oh, this is so heavy. I mean, this is something I could sit on the patio and drink all day long, or on the lawnmower while I'm out on the yard, or at the pool, at the beach, the ball
Yeah.
game. I mean, it's one of those all around type of beers.
Yeah, it absolutely is. While I'm drinking this, I'm actually thinking of another beer that I had recently because when I was just kind of shopping, I happened across a brand called Ottakringer, which is made in Vienna in Austria. And I was kind of taken by it because I spent a little bit of time in Vienna as a student. And, Ottakringer was just like one of the beers, right? Yep. And so I'm like, oh, well, I got to get this. And I was so excited that only kind of when I got home, I noticed that they labeled it a Vienna Lager, which I'm like, oh, okay, well, it is from Vienna. But then when I cracked it open, poured it into a glass, like this beer I have is very clear, very, very pale yellow. This was exactly like you were saying, the very coppery, darker, very maltier approach. And let me just say, I'm 99% sure that beer was like made almost exclusively for export, because that is not the Ottakringer that I remember. It's been a few years, but like when I was in Vienna, I think it was much closer to a Helles style, and I think the Vienna Lager is almost. I can't speak to whether it's consumed at all, like in Austria or in Vienna, but I have a feeling that its heyday is kind of past, and now it's more of a gimmick that gets exported or things like that if it's anywhere.
You're correct. So at its high point, it was all over Europe. But it has since kind of died down. It actually has seen a resurgence in North America because of craft brewers. And you're right, though. It should be a coppery color. It should have more of a malty flavor to it. Like I said, this is a variation on it. So they started with the same recipe, but they've changed it out for local ingredients. But that being said, they are very closely related. They use the same backbone malt. They just switch out a couple of the other malts that are in the beer, which is why it has different color and different flavor profile. Yeah. But you are correct. It's saying that it's probably made pretty much only for export. I mean, that's probably right on the money.
Yeah, and since I got my since I have my historian hat on for this broadcast, I'm going to plug a book by a guy named Andreas Krenmeyer, who he lives in Germany, but I believe he's Austrian originally. Don't quote me on that. I'm sorry, Andreas, if I got that wrong. But it's a book called Vienna Lager, which is available, on Amazon or I don't know, probably a few other places. And he has done, to my knowledge, some of the foremost kind of research and digging into exactly what Vienna Lager is and where it came from. That's anywhere right now. And I know he talks at least some about the history of its transport to Mexico, like you were saying, and things like that. I think there's a couple myths busted in there. I haven't been able to read the book myself yet, but it's the book if you want to know about Vienna Lager and if you want to have something to read while you're sipping your latest one.
Nice, and then be able to have a little bit of that beer cred that you can throw down on people. Mm. Bam! This is what this is.
You'll be as popular as Cliff Clavin.
That's right. For people who don't know who Cliff Clavin is, you need to go watch Cheers. So, looking at this beer, visually, the carbonation, you should see rising bubbles, and they should be moving at a medium to fast pace. There shouldn't be an excess of them, but visually you should be able to pour it and you see the little bubbles rising, kind of like you do when you pour out a pop or whatever. You should have once it opens up on your palate, you should have a notable amount of like a toasted malt character to it, with some medium sweetness that follows behind it from the corn that's added to it. So it should be a slightly sweet beer overall. Mouthfeel should be soft, so it should be a full body, not like super dry and crisp, or not one of those ones that like you get with like a barrel aged beer where it kind of lingers in your mouth and coats your mouth. This isn't this. It's you know it's there. You know it's not water that you're drinking, but it doesn't stick around for the long term. You know the finish on this should be fairly short. You know, a couple seconds and you're ready for something else to go in your mouth, because that flavor is gone. As I said earlier, the proper glassware for according to the style is the flute, and it should be served between 7 and 10 degrees Celsius, which is 45 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit for my friends who are not metric friendly. And you know, it again, like I said, it's one of those beers that typically it falls anywhere between 4 and 5.5% ABV. So it's going to be something that you can drink multiples of this and not be knocked on your ass. Unlike the beers I typically drink for myself, which tend to be double digit beers, so I can drink 2 and be done for the day. You know. So, Brian, tell me a little bit about what it is you're working on these days, because you said you're a historian, right?
Yes, yeah, I'm a historian, and boy, I'm working on a lot these days. I had some kind of long-term projects that just recently came to fruition that I'm really proud of. So I mainly work through a beer media website called Good Beer Hunting, and so I've started doing some podcast work for them. It's called the Source Material Podcast. And so I'm putting out about an episode a month, which is slow in the podcasting world, but that's because these are extensively researched and very carefully written podcast episodes that I hope, you know, give a lot of really neat insight that kind of, you know, your 800 words article that wouldn't be able to provide because you just don't have enough space and things like that.
Right.
So for that, so far, I've talked a lot about kind of lager beer and public health debates during the 1800s, which sounds boring, but let me plug it here. Give me a chance. You know, I had 3 episodes, one of which is about all these court cases in the 1850s when people literally asserted that lager beer couldn't get you drunk. And rather than turn to scientists and doctors, they turned to literally courts and legal precedents and interpretation to figure this out. Another episode was all about cholera epidemics, and when people were basically saying, oh my God, beer causes this disease, don't drink beer. But then you had another faction that was saying, are you kidding? Beer prevents this disease. You got to drink beer if you don't want to get cholera. And, you know, how did they figure that out? And then the last episode in that series talks about the idea of adulteration, which is when everyone from the brewers to temperance and prohibition fanatics to the government, we're always kind of like accusing each other of putting like poisons or bad substances into their beer. And for like over 50 years, this completely like basically put the public perception of beer kind of in a blender about like what's good beer and what's not. And it very nearly led to what you would call like an American beer purity law, like the German beer purity laws, like the Reinheitsgebot and things like that. We came kind of close to getting some of those in the US as a result of all this nonsense. So a lot of interesting stuff.
So, you know, the whole people not listening to brewers and scientists and experts sounds a whole lot like a current situation that has to be going on in North America right now that will remain nameless.
Oh my goodness, I had no idea. Complete coincidence that I wrote this when I did.
So. Wow. Yeah. That's awesome. So what's the name of the podcast that you're doing?
Well, it's published through Good Beer Hunting, so it kind of comes out in their main podcast feed.
Okay.
So if you're looking for like on Spotify or Apple or whatever, just look for the Good Beer Hunting podcast. But my slice of it is called the Source Material Podcast. And
awesome.
So I'm kind of putting things out as often as I can, and got a whole bunch of great topics lined up, ranging from Wisconsin maltsters who made their way to Japan to revamp breweries there, to the Coors boycotts, which are just a fantastic subject that's kind of coming up next. That should have released by the time that this episode comes out. Boy, all sorts of things.
So how is it that you got interested in beer history?
That's a good question. Well, I mean, I was in graduate school, working on a doctorate in history, and I started out doing something totally different. That was much more boring. But just over time, I mean, that kind of coincided with my entrance into liking craft beer generally. So, I'd be studying and doing my classes and, teaching and all that kind of stuff. And then I'd, go out to a bar with friends after, and found myself doing like beer passports and, stuff like that. This would have been at Purdue University in Lafayette, Indiana. And eventually I just started wondering, well, how does beer help us answer some of these historical questions I'm always trying to answer? And the more I started looking at it in my time period, which was the mid 19th century in the United States, the more I realized that beer was not only this absolutely like fascinating, deep topic, but it was also one that had only kind of gotten so much treatment by historians. There's certainly been some books, but it's not like the Civil War or something where there's been like tons and tons of work. And so I
Right.
saw a lot of gaps. I saw a lot of potential and things that could be worked on that hadn't quite been fleshed out before. And next thing I knew, I was merging history of lager beer with the history of German immigration and ethnicity and how Germans, became accepted Americans, because that wasn't a given. That wasn't easy. And beer actually played a huge role in, helping Germans convince the non-German Americans. They're like, hey, we have something awesome to bring to the table here. And our culture is not just something that you should tolerate, but something maybe you should borrow from. And we'll borrow from
And maybe,
American culture.
right, and maybe celebrate.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
so yeah, and having grown up and gone to school in the Midwest and stuff where there's so much German culture around, where there was a little festival called Saufen Spiel, in the town next to mine every year when I was growing up, all those kind of things. It seemed to really fit, and it seemed to be something I could identify with, and I've been doing it ever since.
Yeah, so we're both from the same basic area in Illinois, about an hour apart from each other. And yeah, there's a huge German, Austrian contingency there when it came to culture and everything. I mean, my grandparents came over from Germany in the late '40s and settled in Rockford, Illinois. So it's like, yeah, I totally get. There was always. I mean, I used to go to a restaurant in Rockford called Der Rathskeller, which is,
Yeah.
it's a German thing. It's the restaurant in the cellar, and they had nothing but German beers on tap, and they made all their own authentic German meals and everything. It was absolutely fantastic. But it was like that throughout the entire area. Northern Illinois, southern Wisconsin, and things like that are just chock full of Germans.
Absolutely. So yeah.
So how long have you been doing this? I mean, I don't know how old you are. You obviously look like you're a little bit younger than I am. So, um, how long have you been doing beer history and history in general as your profession?
Oh well, I'm 33 years old, and so I certainly have not been doing this as long as some of the real greats and veterans in American beer history, like people like Maureen Ogle or Stan Hieronymus and many more. So I probably started really sinking into beer related research around probably 2014. So
Okay.
maybe 6 or 7 years at this point, and I was still been in grad school at that time. I've graduated about 3 years ago now, a little over 3 years ago. And so, between getting all the work done, that was beer related research to finish the doctorate. And then, I did some museum work after that with the Chicago Museum. And I've been doing a lot of freelance work since then, writing and things like that. It's just been one project after another.
So what I'm hearing here is I should have been calling you Doctor Brian
Oh, man,
Alberts.
yeah.
I
That's a
have my
great way to make
doctor.
friends.
I have my doctorate in beerology.
That's right.
That's awesome. So, what made you move to the West Coast from the lovely heartland of America?
Oh, that was life happening. So as anyone who's familiar with academia, either whether they're in it or just unfortunate enough to see it from the outside, um, academia is a very tough job market, kind of one of the toughest of the tough. And so I was getting my doctorate alongside my partner, who was getting her own doctorate in aerospace engineering, and so it kind of became clear that, wherever she was going to get a job was where I was going. And so, she now works for Boeing in Seattle. But basically that meant also that while I was looking for work, I was more or less region locked, right? Which in an academic job market is death, because you basically, they expect academic candidates, especially early career ones, to basically move around the country for, 1-year contract jobs for however long it takes before they land, that nice tenure track professor gig that's supposed to last them the rest of their career.
Right.
And firstly, that is not how it works for a lot of people in academia or who get their doctorates or things like that. And even for those who do, it can be very bohemian, it can be very stressful. And not only was I kind of region locked because I just wasn't going to live apart from the person I married, for years.
Oh yeah, no.
Yeah.
Totally
people,
understandable.
Yeah. Some people do it, but I wasn't going to. And then my graduation also happened to coincide with the birth of my first child. And so that was, another reason. Well, no way am I going to be, absent, right? Or somewhere else. And so, since then, I've basically been having to kind of couple being a historian with being a stay-at-home dad. And since then, we've even had a second child, and so a lot more love and magic in the house, but also a lot more juggling to do.
Right. But don't discount being a stay-at-home parent, because that is a very undervalued position. I mean, being a parent is one of the simultaneously most frustrating and most rewarding jobs you can ever have, but it doesn't get the respect that it should. It never has. It doesn't matter if you're a stay-at-home dad, a stay-at-home mom, or if you're a grandparent raising some your children's children. It doesn't matter. It doesn't get the respect that it should. So don't you haven't actually said, oh well, I'm also just this. Yes. But I just want to put my opinion out there that being a staying at home parent, especially in the current climate, is a great thing that you can do for your kids. I mean, being there for them and helping them guide them along the way and make the proper decisions, because Lord knows that public school systems don't do a whole lot of good when it comes to helping kids make proper decisions these days.
I mean, yeah, not that this was known in advance or the plan or anything, but my daughter, my second child, was born in December 2019, and 3 months later, we all know what happened. And so being a stay-at-home parent ended up being this incredible blessing, and that my kids are young enough to not be school age yet, and then also like we didn't already have them like going to daycare all the time or things like that,
right?
Because as soon as COVID started, daycare was a whole different equation at minimum. Not to mention they probably would have closed at least for a long time at the beginning, even if they're open now. So the fact that I was already kind of in this pattern of being the stay-at-home parent was such an unexpected blessing. And, I'm really happy.
Most definitely. Yeah. I can understand that for sure. Now, see, luckily I don't have to worry about that. My one child is 27 years old this year. 28. I don't know.
Such a great age.
Yeah. She's independent. That's all that matters.
Yeah.
No, she actually still lives back in Illinois. So,
oh, great. Yeah.
So she moved a whole 7 blocks away from where she grew up, and continues to live in the Rockford area, and she's doing good and everything. But
no, that's great. Yeah.
But yeah, it's like I am certainly thankful that my parenting responsibilities have diminished to the point to where they have long before the whole pandemic thing hit, because
oh my goodness,
it's just crazy. Like we've got friends who have younger children, and it's nuts what the hoops they've had to jump through to try and make things work during this.
No, my heart goes out to all the people having to worry about that. And there's, even though it's been talked about some, I think as a society, we've talked so much more about like how hard it is to transition from office work to home work, or, things like that. I'm like, have you ever tried getting an 8-year-old to sit in front of Zoom for 8 hours a day and get them to learn something in the process? And then also, and that's even before you consider like, your own career. Like, I am so glad that I don't personally have to do that. And I am so sympathetic to everyone who does, because that is, I mean, that's more than a full-time job on its own.
Yeah, no, it really is. It really is. All right. Getting back towards beer stuff here. Sure. Mexican lager. So is this your first time actually having an actual Mexican lager, or is this a
Oh,
style you?
hardly.
Okay, well,
Um,
yeah, I never know. So I ask because I've actually had a couple shows where the style that we're discussing, it's the first time people have
oh
ever had
wow.
it, and it's great because in both instances that happened recently, the person's like, "Wow, I would have never picked this up on my own." But this
Wow.
is definitely going into my rotation of styles that I'm going to be drinking, which is great, which is kind of the whole point of the series is to try and introduce people to beer styles that they might not try it on their own.
Yeah,
So, but
absolutely. No, I wouldn't say that it's a style I gravitate towards more than any other. I'm pretty cosmopolitan in my beer choices.
I am
But I
not.
love it. Oh, really? You have your lane and you stick to it.
Well, I will drink any beer that's given to me, and 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 I will drink any style of beer. I'm not opposed to any style of beer, but left to my own devices, I gravitate more towards stouts and porters, and
Okay.
the higher ABV, the better. So it tends to be the barrel aged beers. But
Gotcha. Okay.
I, I like a beer that gives me a good punch in the mouth,
Oh, they'll do it. Yeah. Oh,
but
that's great.
but no, yeah, I drink just about everything, like, and I kind of have to because of the of what I'm doing here is, I have to be familiar with multiple styles. But left to my own devices, I tend to drink a lot of porters, a lot of stouts, and a lot of like ESBs, so the English special
Oh, nice.
bitters, and
Yeah.
things like that, because I love those big malty beers. That's my thing. I mean, it's that
Okay. Yeah.
I'm not a huge fan of like all the hoppiness. I'm more of a malt fan.
Okay. Well, you said you haven't been to Oregon or Washington much yet. Be prepared. That's hop country.
Yeah.
You can find any style, but hops are very popular, and hoppy beers are everywhere all the time. So.
Right. I mean, I buy when I brew, I buy all the hops I get from Yakima Hops.
Mhm.
So yeah, I'm familiar with the fact that Washington State is hop
Yeah.
country.
Yeah, I think it's almost time for the harvest if they haven't started yet. When this is being
Yeah.
recorded, at least.
Yeah, no, yeah. So it is harvest time. I actually grow my own hops as well, and I've been harvesting them the last couple of weeks. So yeah, it's that time of year. It's the end of August, beginning of September when they start really harvesting those hops, and it's fun. This is the first time I've actually harvested them. I used to just grow them because I liked the look of the plants,
Hmm.
and I'm like, oh, actually going to harvest them this year, and I'm going to see what I can make with them. But my one big plant, I've got 6 plants total, but 5 of them I just planted this year, so they haven't really put anything off. But the other one is like 3 years old, and I've pulled off 2.5 pounds of hops off of it so far.
Wow.
And
Okay.
there's probably at least that much more on it that I haven't gotten to yet.
It's hard
It's
work, isn't it? Like getting like for what it
uh,
is.
yeah, for what it is, but
Yeah.
it's pretty simple work though. I mean, you
Yeah.
cut it off about 6 inches from the ground, and you pull the vines down, and you pull all the things off. I'm doing it all by hand, obviously, because I'm not a big production where they pull it all down and do it mechanically. So I'm doing it all by hand. So it takes me. Well, I mean, the batches that I've gotten out so far have taken me about 3 hours to do. So I've got probably another 3 hours of work to do
Wow.
to
Yeah.
harvest the rest of it.
Mhm.
But it'll be fun. I've never brewed with fresh hops before. I've always just used the pelletized stuff. So it'll be interesting. I do know that you have to use 4 to 5 times more. So
Wow.
if
Mhm.
if your recipe calls for 4 ounces, you got to use a pound.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's pretty interesting. But you know, um, if you would, once again, for people who might not have been paying attention, where can people find your work at right now?
Okay. Yeah, I mainly work through the website called Good Beer Hunting, which is kind of a beer media site. My podcast comes out through their feed, but I also have my own website called, which is brewculture.org. And so there I have, like a listing of like all the articles and appearances I've ever done. Like this will make it on there with a link, at some point. Um, I
Are
also
you
have
sure you really want to do
I don't know.
that?
Yeah, maybe I'll watch it first. I I also have a separate page there that's going to list all my podcast episodes in case you don't want to dig them out of the main feed for Good Beer Hunting, which has all their episodes about a variety of subjects. And
Excellent.
so that's where I do most of my work. I'm also publishing in other outlets here and there. So I've been in the Washington Post a couple of times, and oh boy, if I I hate making promises before I can know whether they're done. But by the time this comes out, I may have another article in the Washington Post.
Awesome.
I'm supposed to be working on one, and I really hope that goes through. And honestly, that's mainly it. I've been loving the relationship I've built with the Good Beer Hunting folks, and so that's kind of where I tend to go first. I'm not against going anywhere else, but that's just you go with who you know, and you go with who you know works well with you. I'm also doing some work that hopefully has a bit more of like a physical presence. One of the recent projects I did, which is also on Good Beer Hunting, was I contributed to a series about Charleston, South Carolina. I'm going to mispronounce it because it's a Gullah Geechee phrase from the Black community in Charleston, but it's called "Take Care to Root," which is kind of a Gullah Geechee phrase, basically take care of the roots, as an idea of solving problems by attacking the roots and not, looking at the symptoms instead of disease. But that is a fascinating story that is all about the Charleston Schützenfest, which was a German ethnic festival. It was actually a rifle tournament that got really big and popular in Charleston during like the 1870s. But it also ended up being kind of co-opted into this kind of beacon of white supremacy in the state. And this would have been during Reconstruction, when obviously a lot of racial questions were being revisited and very unfortunately answered by the way things turned out. But it's a 3-part series, and there's a lot to say, so I won't try and recount it all. But suffice to say, this is a really fascinating story about how the Black community in Charleston interface not only with white supremacy and surviving that kind of onslaught, but also with their relationship to the German community, which was not initially seen as white by whiter Charleston. And this story is part of how that changed. And so that's a really fascinating story, and I'm hoping to work with other people in Charleston and other parts of the country to do some public history projects in that city.
It sounds really cool.
Yeah, you can be surprised what you can do with a collab beer to tell historical stories, and the ways that you can use that to channel interest and money and attention onto community engagement projects and stuff that actually does much more good than a beer does.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, like that's like the whole Black is Beautiful thing. I mean, doing the beer was cool, but the underlying stuff where the money got funneled to is what's really more important. And don't get me wrong, I drank my fair share of Black is Beautiful beers because every brewery up here was part of it, raising money and raising awareness and things like that. But the beer should really be seen as the secondary part of the project.
It should, and especially with Black is Beautiful, but also just more commonly with these types of things, it's unfortunately common for the brewer to do something like that without actually kind of following through on and actually like translating the money they make or the attention that they derive, that they garner into things that matter. And more than just like, oh, we made a beer, wasn't that cool? Try our next beer,
Right.
And so that's something we're trying to be very intentional about as we do these types of projects. Is like, we'd love to do a beer with you, we'd love to do a project with you, but what are the goals? What's going to actually come out of this that's tangible and meaningful? Because if it's just a token gesture that's meant to put eyeballs on your brand, I mean, you can pay your own people to do that.
Right. No, and you're exactly right. That's the whole issue with a lot of these things. They're great intention, but the follow through by most of the participants tends to be lackluster.
Absolutely. So
awesome. Well, we've come to the end of another episode. So this is the part of the show where I say, if you liked it, please click like. If you would, please subscribe and click the little bell to be notified when new episodes drop. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, suggestions for a beer style or beer you'd like to have talked about, if you want to be on the show, leave a comment below. Any questions for Brian, feel free to leave them in the comments and I will forward them on, or you can find him yourself on Twitter. He's at brewed_culture, right?
Yep, that's right.
So, you could ask the source directly and don't rely on me to be the middleman because I might fuck it up. We don't know. But yeah, until next time, I'm Rob from the internet. Yeah, cheers.
Great talking to you. Thanks.